on YouTube. Double broadcasting for a moment. And now I'm broadcasting. Now I'm broadcasting through YouTube. I hear myself, and now I'm going to stop doing Inception. Okay. All right. How is everyone doing? I'm going to mute YouTube for a sec.
Hello, hello,
Test.
hello,
Hello.
hello.
Make sure you see green on your end.
Testing.
And put the headphones on because I hear myself in your echo.
Hello, hello.
Speech. Speech is me. Yes, I'm talking. 545.
Hello.
32.
Okay, so there we are. Make sure you have headphones on because I can hear me.
How do you turn on? Oh.
Okay, I'm talking in YouTube. So I'm still monitoring chat, although there's a little bit of a lag. So the calendar up here shows September 16th, two things in class. There's a take-home quiz test due on Monday. There's an hour and a half time limit on it. You can take it whenever you'd like. It is open book, open notes, but it's to be taken by yourself. So find a spot in the library or Winter Hall somewhere where you can do that. There's another one that this isn't a live calendar. This is just a screenshot up here. And so there's another one, there's the rest of chapter 19, there's a quiz on that, which is the same lecture material or what we're going to finish today in next lecture for the 24th. And then after that, we're going to do our next programming assignment. So that should be up shortly as well. You'll see the second quiz on the 24th. It should be on a live version of Canvas as well. That's our logistics. Today we're going to wrap up our 19.1 to 19.4 discussion, and what we're shifting into is we are transitioning over the next couple lectures into talking about web crawling, and you're going to have a programming assignment about crawling the web, and so we're going to talk a little bit about the mechanisms for that, but we're not quite going to get there today. Any questions before we get rolling? Okay. Then let me set up my screen and we'll work through some slides together and talk about web search. Arranging my windows. Pardon my glitchy. Okay, great. Here we are. For real, just trying to let my windows settle out. Come on now, Windows. All right, looks good. So we have been going through this discussion of how classic information retrieval became web information retrieval, how sponsored search is a part of that, how web search basics and how we think about the web have a lot to do with with our modeling of the web. Talked a little bit about the size of the web and how you might think about that. And we're going to keep moving on that discussion. We're talking about web users today. So what I'd like to start with is a little bit of a brainstorming session. And what I would like to do is there's been some research on this, which we'll look at in a second, but I'd kind of like you all to, in the chat, think about for a second what it is, what are reasons that cause you to go to a search engine? And so let's start by asking that question, like very specifically, what are some things that you've gone to a search engine recently to look at? And go ahead and throw them in chat and we'll kind of read through them and we'll see if we can categorize some of these things as we see categories developing, sort of impromptu open coding. Fact checking professors, all right. Questions, what kind of questions, Landon? Okay, good, find a site without a URL, nice. What does Richard Rohr believe? Great. He believes in falling upward. To find information about a certain business, okay. Strategies for games. Interesting, Wikipedia page for the subject. Interesting that you use a search engine as a proxy for going to the Wikipedia page. So it's just easier. Navigation. Talia, what kind of navigation? Looking for class information. Okay, driving you to Westmont. Looking for store. How to change payment information on an Apple family account. Oh my gosh, good luck. Recipes. Okay. Class-related information. All right. C# documentation. Okay. Looking up recipes on TikTok. Huh. For definitions and synonyms. All right. When did Gandhi die? All right. Westmont Web Advisor. So a lot using this interesting, several people have mentioned kind of using a search engine as sort of a shortcut for things that you know are out there. Yeah, that's what Talia just kind of said. Oh, so Talia, when Talia said navigation, what she meant is when she already knows what website she wants, so navigating to it. Finding music on YouTube. How long a scuba license lasts. easier to Google. I usually use Google than the Westmont site. Yeah, our Westmont site was transitioned from an old version to a new version, and like the links were all over the place. New strategy now, though. Random questions, researching what parts of my PC or phone is made of so I can find replacement parts. Good. All right, let's take a second and see if we can try and categorize what some of those, what you might consider some of those. Let me, while we're doing that, let me see if I can figure out how to get a document up that I can write on. Let's do something lightweight. All right, so here's just a text document I've got open. Of the things that just went through, let's try and come up with some buckets that would capture all the different things that people just said. What are some examples of things that people said that would be categories? Like we want to find things that represent many of those pieces. All right, so Frank says one thing we might call it is static information. All right, so let's talk about it in terms of things that the user is doing. What's the behavior that the user is doing? It's an information seeking. Let's call it like a fact checking. That might be a good category for static information. All right, Claire says current events. Tell me more about that, Claire. What do you mean when you say current events? Because that could mean news, that could be a concert, that could be I need to know when the store is open. What are you thinking when you say current events? Okay, so that's interesting. Josh is kind of pulling up the thing we kind of mentioned, which is like shortcuts to known sites. So using a search engine as a bookmark. So kind of, and I think a lot of times that looks like memorizing queries we'll say on Google that you know are going to take you where you want to go. So like typing in Westmont Web Advisor into the search bar because you know that's going to take you exactly where you want to go and it's easier than trying to get it on the URL. So Ben, is that kind of what you had in mind? Same thing? Can you zoom in on the Zoom window? Yeah, maybe. Let's see. A better way to do it would be to change my font, but there you go. Thanks for that. Okay, so fact checking, we've heard that. Still interested in more of this current events bit. Shortcuts to known sites. So that's the only strong one I've seen there. But not everything you're doing is a shortcut to a known site. What else are we doing? Okay, so finding information. Let's categorize what sort of information are you out there looking for? We said current events, still kind of not curious what that means. Fact checking, okay. Well, here's one I use all the time. I need directions to a place. So I need like geographic directions. That's just like I don't know how to get somewhere. So I look at that. Okay, Claire rescinds her current events. We said music, so there's sort of a category here of entertainment. So listening to music. What else do you go to a search engine for that sounds like entertainment? Looks like game strategies was interesting. Heard that. This is kind of a user-centered design process, trying to think through what are the different mechanisms. There you go, movie streaming, music, video / movies streaming. All right, so talk to me about the news idea. Do you mean just seeing what the news is, or particularly digging into a news thing? Like, which one do you think you're more apt to do with a search engine? Frank says music humming. It didn't work for me, by the way. I tried to hum a song and I sing so poorly that even Google Hum can't find it. Okay, finding academic information. Now, I guess one thing that I thought was curious about the way that you guys talked about using shortcuts to known sites down here. So you like know that there's something on Westmont's website, like the final exam calendar, and you go to Google in order to find the final. That's one that I do all the time. I go to Google to find the final exam calendar, and I know I type in Westmont College final exam, and I know it's going to like get in the top 1 or 2 links, and that's exactly what I want. And that's just so much faster than trying to dig through the navigation on Westmont's site, which is interesting. But what else is interesting about that is like I don't do that for something like Netflix. Like to find information on Netflix, I don't go Netflix, Lord of the Rings. For some reason, I go to Netflix and then I search. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we learn that kind of different behavior on different sites like that? Yeah, Josh, totally meme checking all the time. All the time for me. It means you're getting old. Yeah, some of it is about the user experience of the website for sure. It's easier to get to something if you go through Google. I would say sometimes it's blocked though, so sometimes you can't actually get into the content of the website without logging into the website first. I'm not sure how Netflix works in that regard, but it's never occurred to me to do that. So Sam's talking, finding the fastest way to do something is sort of the key goal. And yeah, and so like Google, one of Google's key metrics is to be super duper fast. And this is part of the reason because you end up using a search engine to do all kinds of stuff that there are other tools on your computer to do. Like you have other tools to grab bookmarks, for example, and store bookmarks in your browser. But it's kind of almost more work to look up the bookmark and try and find the URL just within your browser than it is to just know some keywords that are going to work on Google. Yeah, Amazon's interesting. So there's a certain behavior that I think captures what happens with Amazon as well. So let's these are great. So this is interesting because the behavior of how people work on the web is changing all the time. What tools are available and what people are doing with it. And so this is kind of an interesting exercise for me to sort of get my head around the zeitgeist of how you all are thinking about what you're doing. Now, of course, there's all kinds of things that you're probably doing that you haven't actually internalize the fact that you're doing it, right? So there's all kinds of behavior that you might be doing that you don't think about. It's sort of invisible to you. And we have to just acknowledge that you may be doing certain kinds of things on the web through Google that is just not occurring to you because it's so normal. And this reflective practice is a starting point for trying to understand how someone uses a search engine. But observing other people actually using it is interesting too. So you get sort of a third party external view on what's happening in terms of these in this terms of this use of a particular tool, because you don't always have sufficient insight into what you're doing to be able to introspect about it effectively. That's why there are a lot of different user experience and user interaction design research methodologies that we talk about in 130, 150 sometimes. All right, so marching on smartly. These kinds of user needs studies are done quite a bit, trying to understand what people are up to, and this is one in particular that categorized the different ways in which people use the internet into three. This one picked three informational searches, so wanting to learn about something, and in this categorization, it was like 40%. Navigational, meaning knowing a specific page that you're trying to go to. That's kind of the shortcut version. So trying to find information but not knowing which page it's on. Navigation, knowing exactly what page you're trying to get to. And then transactional, meaning you have some action in mind that you want to have happen, and it's not specifically associated with the website or information. This would be like, I want to listen to a particular video, or I want to listen to a particular song, or I want to buy more Q-tips or something like that. So informational, navigational, and transactional is one kind of categorization. But again, this is maybe a web search engine strategy, but there are all kinds of other things that we're doing on the web. We could be communicating. These sorts of categorizations kind of completely ignore everything that's happening on social media. So you might be going to the website, or you might be going to Facebook, you might be going to Instagram to stalk someone, in a friendly way, not like a creepy way, if you can non-creepily stalk someone. But like, you want to find out what your brother who went away to college is doing, and so you drop into his Instagram just to see what pictures are there. Kind of information, kind of navigational. There seems like there's a kind of specific relational category to that. Communicative, relational, friendship, something going on that I don't think is captured very well by these particular categories. But you do definitely search, right? You definitely search on Instagram for people, friends. I go to Facebook and search for particular people to see what they're up to. All right, so what are some of the ways in which people have categorized what happens with web users' queries? So this is kind of a sequence of data that I had access to. I haven't had a recent data point on this, but what you see here is that from 1998 to 2012, the average number of terms that have gone into a search query have increased. So it started with about 2.35 terms on average. Of course, there's not a 0.35 term, that's an average. And it's been increasing. And last time I got some insight into it was about 2012, where Dan Russell was telling me a little bit about how this is changing. And at that time, and probably continuing to now, the reason why these the sizes of the searches have gone up is because people have been more comfortable asking complete questions rather than doing keyword searches. So they'll ask, how do I make a hard-boiled egg? And they'll just ask that question straight up rather than just being recipe hard-boiled egg, which would be sort of a keyword search instead of a complete sentence search. So on top of that, we now have all these voice queries where we say something into Siri or whatever search interface we have, that gets translated into text, and then that makes our queries seem longer because they're part of a voice-to-text translation process. So the general trend here is that the length of queries is growing, and the general trend here is that they're growing because we're using more natural language processes in order to do queries rather than specific keywords. Even though, as many of you have noticed, or many of you have commented on in our in-person class, that using specific keywords and knowing what you're doing is often more effective than saying complete sentences and iterating on those depending on what you get back. So these queries are growing in size. The general web user is using very imprecise terms. So probably not the technical term for something, probably not the professional term for something, but trying to guess using their best vocabulary to try and explain what it is they want. They very rarely use the kind of syntax operators that are available in Google. The things that allow you to, for example, if you use a minus sign, you can make sure that all of the results that come back don't have a particular term in it. So you can subtract things with a minus sign. You can also put things in quotes to make sure that that string literal is actually in your query specifically. And there are a couple other kinds of specific syntax that you can use. And people don't use these most of the time. They don't know about it. They don't quite understand. Most people aren't, have this computer programming background, which is basically what you're doing, is you're writing like a SQL query or something along those lines. Yeah, Kevin, totally. Try the minus sign. It works. You can combine them together too. You can do a minus sign with the quotes. A lot of low effort, a lot of spelling mistakes. And like, I'm totally guilty of this, just not worrying about the spelling, just blathering something out with my keyboard and just hoping that Google corrects it. And most of the time, as we know, it does. The web users are not like you. And that's an important thing to remember in most design processes. Web users are just not like you. There's a lot of different kinds of needs that people have that they bring to the table. A lot of different expectations about how the web search engine is going to work. They expect it to work perfectly for them. They're bothered if it doesn't work perfectly for them. Their knowledge of how a search engine works or what the tools and mechanisms for making a query are is limited in many cases, and their bandwidth is limited as well. And so if you're on an expensive mobile phone data plan, then the amount of videos that you want to see in your search result is limited. What this picture is right here is it's a series of snapshots of people that are used for personas. If you've ever done any user experience research, one of the things, or design work, one of the things that happens in a design context is you'll get pictures of people that are just generic people, and you'll write a biography about them, about who they are and what they do and what their experience is. It's like writing a little short story that's maybe a page long, and then design firms will put these pictures and these stories up on the wall or in some sort of common place, so that as you think about the design decisions that you make for your web application, for your applications generally, or web search, you're thinking about it with these people in mind, these fictional people in mind. And that helps you to know whether or not a kind of design decision that you want to make makes sense or not, because you bounce it off of the person who's has a mobile phone, the person who is cutting hair all day and doesn't have time to look at notifications, someone who's a software engineer. You usually pick a handful of different personas to make your application work for. And you have to choose those personas carefully, and you're always bringing their user needs back up to make sure that the design decisions you're making and the features you're adding are appropriate for that team or for that set of users. When you get specifically in the context of web searches, when you get information delivered to a web user, most people only look at one result screen. It is rare that people go to screen 2, screen 3, screen 4. What commonly happens is that if you know you're searching for something that's hard to surface, you'll go to multiple web pages. An example of that would be if you were searching for information about the programming language Go, spelled G-O. A poorly chosen programming language, in my opinion, because there's so many other web pages that have the word Go on it. You've got the game, right? The like game that's a little bit like checkers, vaguely like checkers. You've got just the word go, which is a verb. You've got go in all kinds of different contexts. So if you're in a weird search space, you might go to the next page in order to find the thing that you want. 78% of our queries are not modified. So people don't go back and edit or iterate on the query. Instead, what people tend to do is this behavior called the scent of information. And in some of your brainstorming in the chat over there, I noticed you were referring to this behavior a little bit. And what it means is you'll put some kind of vague query into a search engine. That'll drop you into a particular space on the internet, and then you'll go into that space and continue your search from there. So one kind of place where I see this happening in my own search behavior is sometimes I'll want a particular kind of image for a presentation or for a background or something. And I'm not looking for clip art. I'm looking for something that's like pretty artistic, a fully formed image. And I'll search for it. I'll go to the Google Images search, and then it'll remind me of a good site to find those things. And a site that I like to go to is DeviantArt. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. DeviantArt has got some really great like full-sized drawings, portraits, fantasy, landscapes, that kind of stuff. And so I'll use Google in order to drop me into a spot in that website, and then I'll go into that website and kind of follow the scent of information through that website. So a lot of times the search engines are used to sort of parachute into these properties all recipes. You drop into all recipes because that's where you look for your lemon bar recipe. And then once you're there, you start poking around at the other recipes that are maybe better. You don't really come back out and look at other recipe web pages. You know, not strictly, but the scent of information is a real common information seeking pattern. How far do people look for results? This is just a study that sort of demonstrated this. People rarely go more than a few pages. I actually think this is probably much higher than we would see if we studied this again now. Meaning that if people don't find the answer on the first few entries, I think it's rare that they're going to go. I think it's very, very rare that 10% of the people go. I think it's very, very unlikely that 10% of the people are going to go more than 3 pages deep in search engine results now. I think the search engines have gotten better, and that usually what you get is good enough for an answer, or you're better at queries. A real common way in which queries are distributed is according to something called a power law, and a power law is bad for caching. Because what it means is that there are some very specific popular broad queries, but then after that, the queries that are related are fractured pretty broadly. So here's an example of different kinds of words associated with cancer. And the probability of someone entering one of these cancer-related search terms is indicated by the size of the pie wheel, the arc on the pie. And you can see that the most popular one is just cancer in general, followed by breast cancer and then skin cancer, prostate cancer, so on and so forth. But what you'll notice is after maybe the first 2 or 3, the sizes of the pie wheels are pretty uniform. They get smaller and smaller and smaller, of course. But there's not just like 1 or 2 queries that you could cache locally and get good performance on. For example, the query just plain cancer doesn't represent 75% of the cancer-related queries. It represents something like 15%. And in order to get 75% of the cancer-related queries, you would have to cache, what's that, like about 30 maybe different queries. And if you wanted to capture 75, if you wanted to capture like 80% of the results of cancer-related queries, well, now you're starting to get into very, very fine-grained queries, and you're just not getting a lot of bang for the buck. Each additional query is getting you a very minuscule amount of additional data, such that if you wanted to cache it locally so that your responses to your search engine query, so that your search engine server could give responses quickly, you just don't get the benefit of that kind of behavior, having a few queries generating most of the results. And this is called a power law. There's a specific formula for it, but I think it's a little bit more intuitive to understand that it results in a lot of very small marginal additional benefit from keeping those queries around. Now, that said, you're familiar with Google giving you recommendations for popular queries. And you see this in the query completion behavior that you get on Google. So if you go back to 2008 and you think about the top queries, and this is true generally now, but many are just related to sex. There's a lot of searching for pornography and related kinds of items. So in the queries that I'm showing you now, those have been removed. And if you go into like a Google, facility, they'll often have a screen of like real-time queries that are coming through their system, just as sort of like an art project. You kind of see the queries that are coming in, and they screen all the ones out that have anything to do with sex or sexuality. And so it's hard to, and I don't have any insight into what percentage of them are. I just know that they explicitly screen them out quite a bit in these sort of public-facing interfaces for kind of obvious reasons. In 2008, if you were to ask who is, you would get the following kinds of responses as prompted queries from the Google search engine. Who is Obama? Who is McCain? Who is Palin? Who is Lil Wayne? Miley Cyrus? Dalla? Jonas Brothers? Chris Brown? Biden? Martin Luther? What is love? What is life? What is Java? What is SAP? What is Scientology? What is art? How to draw? How to kiss? How to write? How to cook? And these change over time. They are communicated through popularity, looking at what other people have searched for, looking for those queries that start with these phrases. aggregating them and counting how many times they've each occurred, and then ranking them according to which ones have been asked the most. So I've got a bunch of these that I've collected over time. They're hidden in other slides here, but I think it might be fun to just kind of do this and see what we get. So we're looking at 2019. We want to see who is queries. Let's see what we get. Oh, and furthermore, I want to do it in an incognito window so that it's not biased by me at all. Now, of course, we've talked about the way in which context plays a role here, and we don't really know exactly what context is being brought to bear. For example, although it's an incognito window, and therefore my personality or my profile is not associated with this window, what might be associated with this query is the location, because just because I'm in an incognito window doesn't mean they don't know where I am, because the packets have to come from somewhere. So let's take a look at what we get. Start with who is, and this is our list for 2021. Let me capture it. We get who is the richest person in the world, who is Larry Elder, who is one of the people running for California gubernatorial race. That makes me think that it might be predicted based on location, because that's a very California specific query, although the race did get national attention. Who's Larry Nassar? I think convicted predator associated with the gymnastics team, U.S. gymnastics team. AOC, politician. Marshmallow, I don't know. Who's Marshmallow? Someone must know. Tell me in chat who Marshmallow is. Who is hosting Jeopardy this week? Who's the next Bachelor? Who is in custody? I don't know what that means. What does who is in custody mean? Who is Jeff Bezos? The former CEO of Amazon. We'll capture that. And let's throw it in our slides. See if I can do this live. Well, I don't want to mess it up. Okay, so let's do a what is. Oh, actually, let me go back to who is. A DJ. Tommy tells me it's a DJ. All right, and I'll take his word for it. Notice down at the bottom there, you've got, I did get it. You've got report inappropriate predictions. So there's the opportunity, because this is all algorithmic, because it's just driven by popularity, you may have things show up here that are not like clearly offensive things, but they may rise to the top as culture changes and as the algorithms try and keep up with what's going on. These all look okay. Maybe we'll stumble on one that isn't appropriate. So here's a bunch of what is. You see what is Yom Kippur? Now that's an interesting one because there's definitely some context there. I'm not sure, Yom Kippur is like this weekend, like we're in the middle of it or something. It's a Jewish holiday that's currently going on. Certainly time bound. It wouldn't make sense to say what is Yom Kippur 6 months from now when we're in off cycle. So either this is driven by the context of the current date, or it's driven by popularity very recently. Certainly the Met Gala is like that, a recent like celebrity fundraiser that generated a lot of fashion photography. What is my IP? Now that one looks like a more perennial kind of a query that's going to be asked in many different contexts, asking what my IP address is, what is minimum wage, what is pansexual, what is today? I think that probably means the date. You see another one for my IP address, what is RSV, what is the weather today, what is gaslighting? There we go. So capture that one. And then the last one is how to screenshot on my Mac, how to lose weight fast, how to delete your Instagram, how to screenshot, how to pronounce, how to train your dragon. That one's kind of interesting. Threw in a movie reference in the middle. How to write a check, how to get rid of fruit flies. Don't eat fruit. How to make French toast and how to tie a tie. Those are all pretty good. All right, so I'll screenshot them. I'm going to fix that after class. So those things change over time. You see that they modify. So let's look at a few more. These are a little bit more dangerous and starts to drill into what is going on in search engines. So let's take a look at a few of these. Is it safe to? What do we get? Is it safe to travel to Mexico? Go to Disneyland, fly, travel, drink distilled water, smoke lavender. Wow. So there's a bunch of them that have a high COVID sort of relative response. How about is it legal to? Smoke weed, record a conversation, carry a taser, own a monkey, own a ferret, own a fox, ride in the bed of a truck. Let's jump down to why isn't? Why isn't my phone charging, my dog eating, Pluto a planet, YouTube working on Roku, AirDrop working? Asking these questions, you sort of get an insight into what's happening with the world. So let's try that last one. Americans are. That's America's. Americans are. There we go. Americans are entitled. Americans are, of course, the most thoroughly. Looks like there's maybe something else to follow. Americans are overworked. Americans are quitting their job. You can do some other ones. Europeans are nothing. Huh. Nothing shows up. That's curious. Is no one asking any questions about Europeans? Let's try another one. Asians are strong. Huh. That's curious. I hope you recognize that what we're doing here is stumbling into some dangerous territory. We're stumbling into some places where query completions are starting to trip into some very culturally radioactive, not toxic, but culturally radioactive areas. Because very quickly, you can start getting these algorithms to start producing racist, dangerous, scary results as well. So we can say African Americans are, and suddenly we get nothing. Why do you think we're getting nothing? What do you think? Throw some answers up in the chat. Yeah, Frank says backlash in the past. Josh says Google just nips any potential PR nightmares from this in the bud. Probably the same screening process. Well, what's happening here is they are being deleted or they are being censored, depending on how you want to phrase that. Because in the past, these kinds of results have created things that are pretty offensive. And so you'll see things like the report inappropriate results is relatively new because of the number of inappropriate results that have popped up from here. Because algorithmically, these algorithms are just reproducing the behavior that they see on the web. And so whatever problematic, toxic, radioactive behavior you see on the web, the algorithms are just picking it up and reproducing it. And so now there's a screening process so that some of these things don't get, don't get published at all. And so it's not that there aren't any results here, it's that they're being manually, not manually, but there's a separate process for removing these sorts of offensive content. And this gets to something that we mentioned in class a little bit, which is that we don't really know the extent of things that are being modified for our viewing. Who knows what this was going to say beforehand, but we're not going to see it. I'm just kind of curious what white males are. Yeah, you also don't get that. Do you get white men are? White men are black men too. I don't even know what that means. It's an album. So some dangerous sort of space that you start stumbling into, culturally dangerous, not like physically dangerous. All right, but that is just proof that there's some screening going on in the results. Even in the US, when we think that we're not censoring stuff, when we're not China, but there's definitely censoring going on at some level. You just kind of hope that they're doing it appropriately. All right, so what I would like to do is I would like to have people break up for a sec, and I would like you in a group to work in a team, and we'll give you about 15 minutes to do this from 2:05 to 2:20. And I would like you to imagine that you have the resources of Google, and I want you to propose a way to generate query completions, queries like the one that we just looked at. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to just type up, a paragraph or two, whatever seems appropriate. And there's a daily work entry in Canvas for you to do that in. So there are three steps, I guess, to completing this. Step one is to go to Canvas and to find a group for yourself. That's going to be under People, and you're looking for a September 16th daily work group. Self sign up. Wait, let's check. Is it self sign up? Let me take a look. You can do this while I'm. So forget if I assign people to groups or not. Great. You already are assigned in groups. Okay. And there is a group leader in each of the groups. So here, we'll put these up for a second. We have 6 groups and we have 6 seating areas down here. So we've got Claire's group 1's leader. Kevin is group 2's leader. Adeline is group 3's leader. Ben Forster is group 4's leader. William is group 5's leader. And Tommy is group 6's leader. So as you look around in the classroom, as you go around to my avatars, well, let's see, where's my avatar? We can put group 1 next to the sign that says West, and you can put group 2 next to North, group 3 next to South, and then go around, keep going with 4, 5, and 6. Go ahead and have a seat. Talk amongst yourselves about a strategy. Write them down in a paragraph, and then submit them to Canvas, and I'll sound a buzzer at the appropriate time so that you'll know when to come back. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to mute YouTube and go in game for talking here.
Hello.
Wait.
I think so, yeah. Seems like it.
I think Kevin.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I should put on pants instead of these shorts.
Dude, it's like the Spider-Man picture of them two pointing at each other.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wait for. Do we all need to submit it? All right.
Ah, right.
Kevin, you could probably submit it because you're the group leader.
Yay.
If I set everything up correctly, then there should be 1 submission per group.
friends would walk up to me and just be like, "What the f is in your mug?" And I would just tell them, "It's mud."
A lot of other really weird noises. Bell summons us, brothers.
What?
Have we prematurely summoned? Well, at least we summoned when the bell rang.
Yep. Sounds good.
All right, back on YouTube audio, double broadcasting, now single broadcasting. Check, check. Okay. So one group says Google will take in the starting sequence of the query and then find queries that also start with the same sequence and then present them in ranked order by popularity. Factors such as location and recency could be used as well. Fine, looks okay. Track how many people have searched one term, where term could be a single keyword or a small phrase. And if a term has been requested enough times to hit a certain threshold, then we begin collecting autofill information for that query by tallying up how often each query's full phrase involving the term shows up. Once one of those full query phrases passes a certain percent threshold, it gets put on a list of popular queries for that term. Rate the top ranking queries from the top ranking terms for what the queries per minute are for each popular term. Okay, so basically counting. That's about right. All right. Should I want to? Yeah. Okay. We'll just move on. Okay. So thinking a little bit about what a web user's experience is like, there was a particularly good example of this in an article that came out in Business Week, and the idea was that it's a bit timeless because what was happening was this particular user wanted to stop a noisy fan in the courtyard. They were in an apartment building and there were other people there in the apartment building, and they had like a center area in the apartment building, like it was like a circle, and the center area was open where there was dumpsters and parking and things. And in the middle there was a fan attached to someone's unit, their apartment unit, and it was making a ton of noise. And the author was like, well, how am I going to get this fan noise to go away? It's way, way too loud. My strategy is going to be to look up to see if it's violating an EPA sound pollution rule. And so you kind of imagine this user whose task is to stop the noisy fan in the courtyard. And so that translates into an information need, and they're thinking about EPA regulations. And then they verbalize it, like what is the query that I would want? What are EPA rules on noise pollution? And then translating that into a keyword query, EPA sound pollution in this case. And you can see that in this particular sequence of mental moves from a task that the user needs to tackle to the query that they enter, they move through a number of different steps along the way. And imagining that you were on the search engine side and you were to receive a query that said EPA sound pollution, your job as the search engine is to give that user effective information for how they could stop their neighbor from having a noisy fan in the courtyard. That's what they're looking for, but what they've typed in is EPA sound pollution. And so now if you think about that as the search engine's task, you can see exactly how challenging this is. They have to be able to reverse engineer what it is that might have been your initial reason for coming to the search engine based on a pretty convoluted and contorted set of search terms. Given now that we're more likely to see the verbal form, what are EPA rules on noise pollution, it becomes a little bit easier, but still, the task here isn't actually about trying to find EPA rules on noise pollution. The actual task is about this conflict with the other user in their apartment building about a noisy fan. And so as you think about the ways in which you can support a search engine user, like what are the different sorts of things that you might bring up that would help them get to where they want to go, given that you only have this very, very impoverished kind of insight into what's going on? And so search engines have tried a lot of different things over time to try and make this work better for users. And they've gotten really good at it, which is why you go there instead of going to like, you know, Westmont's webpage. So let's start talking about this from the sense of what do you think would have to be true about a page of search engine results for you to consider them high quality? So think about maybe 4 things that you would be looking for, and let's just put this in group chat. 4 things that you would be looking for in the results of a search engine. Let's call it an information query. You're looking for some kind of information. You don't have a particular website in mind. And the web page that you get back, how do you evaluate whether or not that's a high quality result? Or you could flip it around and say, if a web search engine gave me this kind of web page back, I would think that's garbage. So throw some ideas in chat about what you think good results and bad results would be like. All right, reading through a few of them. Boop, 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 doo. Okay, relatability. Ethan, tell me what's relatability means. Reputable source. Okay, so that Josh says reputable source. That makes a lot of sense. Trying to identify what reputable sources are tough. Landon sort of operationalizes that and says things in org, net, or edu are probably better than things that are in like .info or something. The ethos of the web page. Tell me more about that, Josh. .org, Ben trusts .orgs. Talia says she loves it when she types a complete question into Google and they directly answer it, so she doesn't even have to go to a website. So that puts a lot of burden on the web search engine to make sure they got it right. So they are doing the evaluation of whether the answer is correct or not. Josiah says a good result gives me my answer without much fluff. What looks like fluff, Josiah? What's a fluff web page? Is that like your recipe that's got like three pages of? Go ahead.
Yep. That's exactly what I was thinking of. I think it's kind of ridiculous that you have to get through all that, and I think it's really helpful that Google these days actually abstracts the recipe and just provides it without sometimes the necessity of going through the website.
The funny thing is all that, in particular on recipe websites, all that long story about how your grandma told you this recipe and you've had it since you're growing up, since you're a kid, and we used to make it with possum instead of chicken and all that stuff that prefaces the recipe that you care about is actually driven because of Google search engine results. So if you want your recipe to show up in the top of a search engine result, you have to provide a bunch of text like that so your website looks like it's offering some content beyond the recipe. So it's funny that Google's actually driven that change and then they get rid of it by offering the recipe directly. So that's a kind of an arms race issue. The query to the pages, Ethan follows up and says relatability. Oh, I see what you're saying. So Ethan thinks it's a high quality result if the page that you got back has something to do with the query. Okay, fair enough. That's sort of like an entry level result, entry level need. Proximity to the actual topic keyword. Andrew kind of says the same thing. Well-known sources, specificity, very limited ads. Interesting. James thinks high-quality results have less ads than websites that are all ads. I was saying something like what Josh was saying. New York Times is a much more reputable source than some sort of lesser-known publication. And Josiah says, ha, perhaps because he doubts New York Times. Not sure what that means. Dee Dee says, relevant, reputable, synthesized information specific to the query. Okay, so absolutely, right? Like you definitely have to have it relevant to the query. That's just an entry bar. So what then you guys are looking for specific kinds of things. You're looking for kind of a professional presentation. That you could maybe imagine an algorithm could work for you. You're also thinking about social reputation, something that you're somehow through your social network, this is a website that's trusted. And that's not about presentation, but that's something like I trust the New York Times because other people I trust the New York Times, or vice versa. I don't trust the New York Times because other people I trust don't trust the New York Times. That's sort of a big way in which we arrive at what's reputable. Getting your answer quickly. interesting that you look at the URL for that. That's an interesting result. Makes sense? Okay. So some of the things you mentioned. So classic information retrieval relevance, that's the bar. That means that you got to have a web page that has the information that you're looking for. You have to trust the source. You want those results to come back to not be duplicates. So like when we're doing our Sonorum Frostonium result, when the top 8 results are all Ethan Benyez's website, as much as we love Ethan and appreciate his good effort at reverse engineering search engines, as a user of that particular query, seeing 8 different results that are exactly the same lowers my impression of the quality of the search engine. Now, in Google's case, to their credit, they did actually remove those duplicates, and I asked for them to be put back in for the purposes of the contest. But if that had been my actual results, it would have looked like a bunch of garbage. So duplicate elimination is really important. Readability, the fact that when you open the website, it's readable. This is kind of James's point about not having a lot of ads, but also having text that you can read that's a decent color, that's not blinking, that's, a high contrast font. Fast access. So if you click on something, you don't want to wait 2 seconds for the thing to show up. You want it to be there right away. And pop-up ads, we don't have a lot of these anymore, but man, pop-up ads are a killer in terms of making a website look low quality. All right. Now, users have a particular kind of, when we talk about that initial bar to get over, that the data has to be relevant, there are 2 ways that we typically think about whether or not it's relevant. We think about precision and we think about recall. And we're talking about precision. What we mean is how many of the websites that are coming back are related to my query. And this is kind of what you guys said in your chat. How precise is that search portal in locating relevant results? Now, maybe you didn't think about the subtlety here, but another way of thinking about that is in recall, which is how many of the sites out there that are related to my query is the search engine bringing back? So let me try and describe. This is an important distinction, and let me see if I can illuminate it a little bit. Let's say that there are 100 pages out there that are highly related to my query. Precision means that I'm going to get back 10 that are related to my query that are drawn from that 100. Recall means that I'm going to get all 100 back. Recall is about coverage, and precision is about preciseness, getting things that are correct, but not necessarily getting coverage. And you could talk about how precise you are in the first result. You could talk about how precise you are in the first 10 results, how precise you are in the first 2 to 3 pages of results. I think usually when people think about doing search queries, they think that precision is what's most important. If you want to know whether or not a candy bar has gluten in it because you're gluten intolerant, you want to make sure that the website that you get back is accurate. But it doesn't feel like you need to get all the websites back that talk about the gluten content of the thing you're trying to eat. But there are some particular instances where recall is pretty important. Anyone want to take a guess at when that might be? Reading Kevin's answer here. Relevant could be interpreted reasonably. That's what someone would want with that query. Consistent and understandable. If you don't get what you're looking for, you know how to narrow your search. Kevin, news. Tell me more about that. So interested in getting news back. You want recall for news. Why? What's a scenario where you want news recall? Let me give you a few ideas here. You would really like to get, okay, so Kevin answers because we want to make sure we get all sides of a news story. Okay, so that's reasonable. If you're Googling for a new doctor, it sure would be nice to get full coverage on the doctor. You don't want just the website about the doctor from Sansum or your HMO. You also want information about the time your doctor got sued for malpractice. Or you're an employer and you're Googling a prospective employee. You don't just want a page that's accurate on LinkedIn about that employee. You also want to know about the time the employee lit the copy center on fire, that kind of thing. Or You're Google stalking your new date. Someone sets you up on a blind date, and you want to go out there and you want to find everything there is to know about that person, not just something about that person. You want to know, if they're involved in some public social media scandal for sure. Different kind of scenario, right? Where you want coverage. In chat, you guys mentioned a pretty good example for research purposes, trying to get a broad. I mean, I guess you could call these research purposes, right? Just generally researching something, and you really need to get the landscape of how maybe different perspectives see it, or different over time how different things that have occurred around this object. It's not enough to just get a recipe for a lemon bar. You need to know about the time the lemon bar fell on someone and killed them, and then they got sued for lemon bar malpractice. Okay, Google, its UI is simple, no clutter. You can see that sort of the Google search engine page itself really leverages a lot of these things. There's a bunch of pre and post processing tools, the spell check stuff that you're familiar with. Did you mean this? A bunch of suggested alternatives, a bunch of services that you can use, a lot of different ways to deal with typical behavior. For example, a lot of people will type a URL into the search engine box. Google sees this all the time. They don't interpret it usually as a search, that sometimes they'll send you directly there. And that is now baked into the Chrome, the Chrome URL bar, where you type something in and it can either be a URL directly or it can be a search query. And that's part of the way Chrome, the application, is. No, lemon bar malpractice is worse than like apple pie malpractice for sure. All right, so go back to our friend who's trying to find out how to stop the noisy fan in the courtyard. Here's a bunch of ways that we can try and address the need behind the query. So this query is imprecise indication of what the user wants. How can we get a handle on what the user does really want? Well, we can deal with language in a lot of different ways, and we can deal with context in a lot of different ways. So let's talk about, for example, if someone enters a query in another language or some other context, we can look at that. We can guess what type of information the user wants. Do they want a web page result or a map or an image or stock price? All these different things can be getting more at the need behind the query. Of course, correcting spelling, perhaps suggesting related searches, sometimes called Google Fu, sort of a portmanteau of Kung Fu. Google Fu being sort of like really, martial arts master of using Google. So here's an example of, I'm going to show you a bunch of examples over time of how search engines have tackled some of these issues. So when I lived in Japan, I lived in a place called Kitakurahama. It was a neighborhood outside of Tokyo, pretty far outside of Tokyo. And there's a train station I stopped at. And if I type this into the search engine now, you can see that there's a lot of different kinds of, well, not now, but at the time at which I took the screenshot, Google was offering a lot of different kinds of search support. So first of all, it was suggesting that I had misspelled it. Perhaps I wanted Kuju Kurihama. I don't know what that is, but it's not what I wanted. And then you can see there's also a number of different pages that are actually drawn from foreign languages. And immediately they offer to translate that page for me as well. So seeing what I type in there and trying to hit the need behind the query by going ahead and offering me foreign language pages. So that's one complex and possible way of doing it. A little more recent version of this is here, Kitakurahama on the left. And then if you search for Kitakurahama on the right, which is Google Japan on the right, google.com on the left, and you can see you get slightly different kinds of information. A lot of the information overlaps on the left side and the right side. You can see the Wikipedia entry. But you can see that if I search on the Japanese website, I get a Japanese entry into Wikipedia, in addition to the information on the English Wikipedia. So same search, different domains, you get different results back. That's trying to deal with some of the context and present some of the need that the user wants to leverage in getting that information. Here's an example of query spelling. So over on the left, I accidentally typed in Westmont College, and Google gave me results back for Westmont College. It was confident enough that that was a spelling error that it went ahead and didn't give me what I wanted. If I had in fact wanted searches for Westmont College, you can see that there's a link right here where I can get what I actually did type in. So this is interesting because it means that Google has this kind of threshold built into it about how close your spelling error is or how outrageous your query is. So it's so rare for someone to search for Westmont College, and the amount of fat finger key errors that would have to be made in order to get to Westmont College is so small that there's a calculation being done that this was actually in my intent. The intent behind my query was Westmont College, not Westmont College. And so they went ahead and answered the intent behind my query, not actually answering the query that I issued. This is an interesting thing that they're sort of proactively answering what they think I really wanted. Now, pretty good UI, where they, although they're confident, they recognize that maybe they did make an error, and they do allow it to pretty easily for me to click and actually get the query that I wanted. But this is an interesting thing that's happening where they're sort of making some decisions for you subtly pretty well. Here's an example of something we'll call query expansion. This is in Bing, or the live before it was branded Bing. Searching for the word rock, and the query expansions that I want you to draw your attention to are actually over here on the right under related searches. You can see that this isn't a spelling correction. This is taking the word rock and presenting it to me in a lot of different contexts so that I can do a second query based on the kind of categories that Bing knows are out there. So the basic results down here, you can see there's a sponsored one, and then there's presumably organic ones. And it takes a guess that I'm interested in rock.com, the official site of rock music, or rock music on Wikipedia, or Rock, Australia's climbing magazine. So a couple different options here about what they're guessing, but there are a lot of different ways the word is used. And so over on the right, they give me a lot of popular queries that have the word rock in it that are unrelated to the organic results that they gave me. So rock music, I guess that's related. But rocks as minerals, there's nothing over here about rocks as minerals. Pictures of rocks, maybe that's important to me. Rock stars, Kid Rock, Rock Cycle, I don't know what that means. Hard Rock Cafe, all things that are popular, related. Bing can't figure out the need behind my query. I didn't give a lot of information. I just said rock. But they know that there is a need behind my query, and they're trying to help me get there by giving me these related searches that are in pretty diverse kinds of space that still use the word rock in it. Pretty good effort. If we do this on Bing in a more recent version of Bing, you can see that the results are a little bit different. We get a pretty wide range of things in the organic results. You can see you get the rock.com still. You don't get the Wikipedia. You get images of rocks thrown right into the results. You get videos of rocks right in the results. And you can see Bing's version of the knowledge graph over on the right. Maybe I was interested in Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, or rock, the category geology. So trying to do this looks cleaner. Like, I have to admit, this presentation looks a lot cleaner and is probably giving me a better experience. It also looks a lot like Google. Here's a bunch of query shortcuts that you may not realize that you can do. You can do a map, right? That's sort of like straightforward. We know how to do that. You can type calculations immediately into the Google search bar. So if you type in 5 plus 4, you can get the result back right away. You actually get a whole calendar that you can work with as an app. Don't give me dark theme. You can ask for flight information by immediately typing a flight in. So if we were to type in American Airlines 715, I'm not sure this is a flight. Let's see, what's an actual flight right now? So this isn't one that's actually going on. If there were a flight that were going on right now, you would get that flight status back immediately as a service. What else do we get? Unit conversions. You want to know the price of Bitcoin. You want to know $1 in euro. You want some instant answers like animal noises. This is sort of an interesting one. You can just type animal sounds or animal noises and you get back just a little service. What does a giraffe do? The sound of eating of hay. Interesting. Is that coming through? When I click on those sounds, are you hearing it? Okay, great. So this is an interesting kind of unexpected little search appliance that you might not, regularly expect. But of course, parents are doing this all the time. Here, I'll do a dog for Kevin. Wow, ape and dog kind of sound the same until the bark. All right, you've also got things where it is about translation. So probably use Google Translate, pretty common. Trying to get the answer the information need behind the query. So you type in something in a foreign language, Google doesn't assume that what you're trying to do is find information about that phrase, especially if it's not the native language of the domain that you're on. It actually guesses that what you're trying to do is a translation. And so it offers that as the need behind the query. So whole teams of people trying to analyze what the need is behind the query and how do we build little search appliances into the results so that we can get that to the user as fast as possible. Interesting one about Japanese is that you can do a query based on the shape of the character. So you can freehand draw it, and then down at the bottom, it'll give you a bunch of examples of Japanese characters that it might be. And so I believe the one I'm drawing here is Morisaki, which is another name for the neighborhood where I was. Kirikurahama was the train station, and Morisaki was where I lived. And Morisaki's symbol was 3 trees together. Oh, there it is. Morisaki had more than that. If the 3 symbols together is woods, but Morisaki was like a particular set of woods. So you can do a kind of drawing of a character. It says it's translated from Chinese, but it's the hiragana character that's used in Japanese as well. All right, so what I want to do now is I want to give you, we'll do this one kind of quick, spend about 5 minutes, and I want you to try some of these Easter eggs that Kevin mentioned. And your goal is as a team to pick one that you like, take a screenshot of it, and drop it into the second and last in-class exercise that we're going to do today. So here are the queries. You can try a number of these and figure out which one you like and drop it in your canvas. And just so you can kind of get a sense of the range of different search appliances that are out there and that some of them are fun. So go ahead and break into groups, go over to your seating area, try a few of these, just say which ones are fun so each person gets a chance to do it, and then decide which one you're gonna do and put a screenshot in for that for your group work. And I'll play the bell in 5 minutes to come back.
It does not. I had a typo when I submitted my user request, but I can't change my username until the 24th. Yeah, if I go to my preferences in Firestorm, it says that for new accounts, you have to wait a certain amount of time before you can change your username.
The other noises are louder. The ones that you were playing around with earlier. Yeah, it's very, very quiet.
back on YouTube. Okay, it's double broadcasting. There we go. Wolfram Alpha, search engine of a different kind. All right, and so just some more examples of trying to find the need behind the query. So you type in white stripes. It's not obvious that that should be a band or as opposed to things on the side of the road, but you get an entire, at this point, Yahoo was giving you a whole little appliance that would give you pictures of the band, links to the band, lyrics, albums, photos, play popular songs right in the console itself. And you can see there's like a whole little mini website that they've composed just to answer that particular query. I'm not sure to what degree it was manually put together or how much it was automatically put together, but it's kind of a little search appliance. Here's one for my name and where I used to live in Orange County. And you can see that the ways in which they're trying to help me meet the information need behind my query is by giving me phone numbers of people that are named Don Patterson, not located in Irvine, but located nearby. And then trying to give me a bunch of other kinds of information. But phone numbers being a particular kind of trying to answer the need behind the query. So you can see all kinds of, over time, all these different attempts at trying to help users get the information that they want faster. Here's an example of searching for diabetes, and this is a little bit like the suggested queries, related queries with the word rock, but instead they've grouped them. They've grouped information about diabetes into groups of articles about symptoms, treatments, and medications, different communities about diabetes, Yahoo groups, ask a question, Q&As, other resources like national organizations that help with diabetes education and treatment. So this is a different kind of search appliance trying to answer the need behind the query of diabetes. Context, of course, makes a difference. The big ones being location, but also perhaps some information about the geographic location of the thing that you're searching for. So if you search for SNA or SBA, those are both airport codes. That gives the search engine some context about the things that you might be looking for because your query itself has a geographic location in addition to the searcher's geographic location. And your location could be coming from your IP address. It could be coming from your cell phone localization if you're a mobile searcher, or it could be coming from something specific that you've entered in by like specifically designating something as your home or work. Another important kind of query that's context that's used is your query stream. So over time, you've entered a number of different queries into search engines, and that produces a profile of the kinds of things that you're looking for, and that influences your future queries. Your profile influences your future queries. You may explicitly be asking for a kind of context by using what I call and I don't just call it, using what is called a vertical search engine. So this is, for example, using the search engine on Netflix instead of Google because you're looking for a movie, or looking for an actor on IMDb rather than on Netflix because you're looking for related movies or something that IMDb has that someone else doesn't have. Or cars.com, looking at specific specialized search engines. Implicit context is built into the domain name. So if you look for something on google.fr, you're going to get French websites back. They're going to be prioritized and have a higher relevance. It also is used to delete inappropriate results. So the kinds of things that we saw cut out in the suggested queries are also cut out in different locations. So you won't see, popular one is Nazi paraphernalia in Germany. You may also see some of that context built into some of the search APIs as well. We don't have time to do this right now, but I do want to make you aware of something called the lumendatabase.org, lumendatabase.org. Google has to accept these legal requests from governments to remove information, such as information about Tiananmen Square from Chinese websites, or information about Nazi paraphernalia from German websites, or I don't know, different kinds of information that they're legally required to remove. They don't really like that. They feel like that reduces trust in them as a search engine because it creates lack of transparency about what's being hidden. And so they put together something called the Lumen database, which is a database of all of the takedown orders that they've received. So if you go to lumendatabase.com, looks like a search engine when it comes up. if it comes up. But what you're searching for is you're searching for takedown notices from different organizations. You can see why things have been taken down. So for example, they might be taken down because of a copyright complaint. They might be taken down because of it's, I don't know, it's illegal. Here you can see this first one, copyright complaint. Oh, the one that I thought was interesting is there's a Kickstarter for a Monopoly board game, I think about Nazi history. See if we can find this one come up. It's thinking, it's thinking, it's thinking. And we're running out of time. We'll end with this one, sort of a negative note. Here you go. So Hasbro, the company that makes Monopoly and owns the rights to Monopoly, asked Google to remove references to Nazi history Monopoly, which was a Kickstarter project to create a Nazi-themed version of Monopoly. You can see that the source is right here. Hasbro submitted a request for a takedown, and now that has been removed from search engines. I think it's Google search engine that it's been removed from. And so you can see this is an example of a way in which material gets taken down from a website. You can imagine how complex this is technically to take down all of these different kinds of websites. You can see that this seems kind of reasonable and that there must be some sort of vetting process for taking all this stuff down. To Google's credit, in an effort to provide some transparency, they've built this entire system in order to be able to figure out what exactly is being blocked. And you can poke around a little bit and see the kinds of things that are pulled from the search engine results if you're so inclined. That's called the lumendatabase.org. All right, well, we don't have a lot, we have like maybe 10 more slides that talk a little bit more about spam. I think it's important to talk about spam, but I don't want to rush it and we're out of time. So we'll stop here. And I will just remind you that there is a take-home test available on Canvas that's due Monday. There's another one that is due on Friday for the rest of Chapter 19, and I'm working on getting the next programming assignment up. So keep that in mind. It's .org, Kevin. Yep, thanks for your participation. Thanks for joining me in game. I've been watching the COVID numbers carefully, and things are coming down, but it's not down far enough that we are able to remove masks yet. So I'm looking forward to that day. Thank you for your attention. You are dismissed.
Thank you, Dr. Patterson.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And double broadcasting, this is for the purposes of YouTube. We're ending the YouTube streaming. It is September 16th, CS-128, ending up chapters 19.1 to 19.4 of Web Search Basics. Ending the stream. Thank you.